Okay, so welcome to section 6 of the Russian Revolution Revision Guide. We're going to look today at the February Revolution, which is very, very important. And if things had worked out differently, maybe this would be the Russian Revolution that everyone talks about. As it stands, it isn't. This is the first revolution that takes place in 1917. There is a second one that takes place under the Bolsheviks in October 1917, Red October, when the communists take over. This is the February Revolution, where the Tsar is forced to resign. Abdicate is the word that we use, and a bourgeois government takes over, right? So let's just remind ourselves, what did Marxists and communists believe should happen? Well, they believed that history was like a science, and that societies and civilizations developed in set, ordered stages, and that Russia was actually a step behind the rest of Europe at this point, because they still had an autocracy. They still had the Tsar in charge. They had no parliament. They had no sort of professional class, really, that had control. And so this is what happens in February. The Tsar is gone, and in his place, it looks like you're going to have this bourgeois revolution and bourgeois government, and that they're going to have a working, functioning democracy, a little bit like you find in Britain or France or America at this time. That's certainly the hope of a lot of people that take part. In fact, even a lot of the communists that take part in this, lots of the Bolsheviks, the Mensheviks, the social revolutionary parties, the cadet parties, lots of them are happy with taking things slow. And so when the February Revolution happens and a bourgeois government comes in and the Tsar is gone, most people think, well, this is it. This is as far as we're going to go. We've achieved our aim. So let's have a look at precisely what happens, okay? So starts off 1917, January. Large protests are building anyway in Russia, and particularly in Petrograd, which is the capital. Now, why are they unhappy? They're unhappy for a whole bunch of different reasons, okay? It says it here in the causes box, but let's just go through them quickly. Number one, the people didn't like Princess Alexandra, okay? Didn't like her. They felt that she was too close to Rasputin before his untimely death. She was German, so they were fighting the Germans. So how come their princess was German, their queen was German? Weren't happy about that. They were unhappy with the Tsar himself, who was leading the war and doing a really, really bad job. Russian soldiers were being killed. Russian land was being lost. This was not good for the Russians. The Tsar had proven himself to be stubborn. He'd refused to give much power away. This stemmed back from 1905 revolution, when he didn't really change very much, despite there being a demand for him to do so. So all this sort of bottled up frustration kind of bubbles over and bursts out here in the February Revolution. And one of the things that kickstarts it is International Women's Day. Okay, it's a big deal in Russia at the time. Every single year, thousands of people would go out on the streets. It wouldn't necessarily be a protest. It was often a celebration. But in 1917, it definitely took on the looks of a protest. Okay, we've got soldiers coming back from the front that are unhappy. You've got families that have lost soldiers that are unhappy. And they're all out on the streets. But the big difference here is that they are hungry. Okay, food was all being sent to the front lines to help the army. It was not reaching the cities, and people were getting hungry. And as I'm sure you know, and I definitely know, when you're hungry, you get pretty mad, right? So the people are not happy at all, and they come out and they're protesting. Then, as with most of these things, you've got all these factors that are building up to it, and then there is a spark that sets the whole thing off. And that spark is 26th of February, a Russian army regiment stationed in Petrograd open fire and kill over 50 protesters, men, women, children. A teenage boy dies. His picture, you'd say today, it kind of goes viral, right? It's published in newspapers, people see it, and the Russian people are furious with what has happened, as are the other army regiments in Petrograd. And that's understandable. If you were in the Russian army, you would not want to be associated with an army that was killing its own people. And so what happens is the rest of the Russian army, or big chunks of the Russian army in Petrograd, they tie red ribbons to their rifles, they go out onto the streets, and they join the protesters. Once they've done that, they almost take a leading role. These are armed men, many of them with experience of fighting in the war, and they start to do things like attack police stations, they attack the prisons, and they let all the prisoners out. And crucially, they take over the city armory, so they capture the place where all the weapons are kept. And this isn't just a few soldiers. It says here, 150,000 soldiers join the mutiny. Okay, to put that in perspective, I'm talking today in 2020, the British Army is not even 100,000 men big. Okay, I could be wrong. I think it's around about 80,000, 85,000, something like this. 150,000 soldiers joined the mutiny. That's huge. Just in Petrograd. Okay, so the numbers that we're dealing with in 1917, you've really got to get your head around them, because to our ears today, they almost don't make any sense. We don't really think in these sorts of large numbers today, but 150,000 soldiers. And basically the Tsar and Princess Alexandra, they're losing control of the city. She's stuck inside the palace, surrounded by this angry mob, and it doesn't look like they're going to go away anytime soon. The Tsar hears about this and says, I must get back to Petrograd and restore order as soon as I can. So he jumps into his train and starts heading straight back to Petrograd. He doesn't reach Petrograd, okay? The train is stopped before he gets there. His generals, you can see here, his generals convince him to abdicate for his own safety. His generals try and talk sense to him, and they say, look, things are a lot worse than you think, and you're not going to be able to continue doing this. Okay, the game is up. Your time is over. Nicholas II, at first, he tries to abdicate in favor of his, the generals ask him to abdicate in favor of his son, Alexei, but we all know that his son is very, very sick, and that Nicholas is very protective of him. So he says, no, I'm not going to give this to my son. He's not ready. I wouldn't want to put him in this situation. He tries to pass it on to his brother, and they said, no, that's just not going to work either. So in the end, he signs the abdication papers, and Russia has lost its royal family. And the Romanov family that's ruled Russia for over 300 years is no more. It's finished because of that piece of paper he signs whilst in his train carriage on the way back to Petrograd. So what happens in its place? Well, you've got what's called a power vacuum. When the guy in charge quits or leaves or is killed, the big question is, well, okay, now who's in charge? So you had the Duma. That's probably the next body of authority left in Petrograd. So the Duma tries to take over, and the Duma creates something called the Duma committees, which is not all of the Duma, but it's just some members of the Duma. They make a thing called a Duma committee, and it tries to run Petrograd and then run the country. Alongside that, literally down the road in Petrograd, you have something called the Petrograd Soviet that appears. This is workers and soldiers, guys in the Navy, factory workers that come together and they create this thing called a Soviet. Now remember, Soviet in Russian basically means a council. So they create their own council, and it's this that has authority crucially over things like the army and the railway workers through their union organization that pledge support to the Petrograd Soviet. So the Tsar goes, you've got this power vacuum, and then you've got two competing bodies. You've got the Duma committees, and you've got the Petrograd Soviet. Now, the Petrograd Soviet at this point looks like it's more powerful because it controls the army and it controls the railways, which are two very important things at the time. 2nd of March, you can see here, the the Duma committees, they turn themselves into something else. They take on new members, and they call themselves the Provisional Government. Okay, so two organizations in Petrograd now, Provisional Government, Petrograd Soviet. So technically speaking, the Provisional Government is in charge. People like Britain and America, they send their ambassadors to visit the Provisional Government and give them letters saying, congratulations, you've got rid of the Tsar, you have become a fully functioning modern country, well done, and we recognize you as the official authority. But anything they agreed, they had to get the Petrograd Soviet to agree to as well, and we're going to talk more about that in future lessons, okay? So, make sure you have a go at those two questions, and have a go at the quiz, okay, which is down here as well. Okay, right, best of luck.